Good morning and welcome to the Age of Exploration lecture. Okay guys, so for this I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, and there is another attachment on Blackboard that has this PowerPoint presentation and a PDF file so that you can go through the notes at your own pace without listening to my lovely voice. So go ahead and look at that if you don't want to listen to this, or if I'm going too fast. Okay? I hope you guys are doing well. I miss you very much. Okay, so we're going to start on the Age of Exploration. This information is not in your textbook, but I wanted to give you a little bit of an introduction before we start talking about the explorers that landed in the Americas. Okay, so let's start with Eric the Red. He was alive, they think, between 950 to 1003 AD. Eric the Red, his name is usually spelled with a K. Sometimes you'll see Eric with a C, but it doesn't really matter. He is called Eric the Red because of his red beard. There's not very much information actually out there about him because there weren't very many written records about his life. We do know that he was exiled from Iceland around the year 982 for murder, and I think he committed a couple of murders. Most of them were actually kind of emotionally charged, heated of the moment kind of murders. They weren't planned out ahead of time, but he was a pretty emotional guy. Apparently had a really bad temper. So he was exiled from Iceland, and exiled means that he was sent away and was not allowed to live back home as part of his punishment. As opposed to going to jail, he was exiled. Despite his exile, he was actually had quite a bit of money and was able to pay for a trip to explore some areas west of Iceland. And so he took his crew and sailed west to Greenland, and he spent 3 years exploring around the tip of Greenland. Now after he went his initial exploration, he convinced about 24 boatloads of people to settle in Greenland. However, only 14 of those boatloads made it due to some severe weather. Greenland is in quotations there because Greenland, as you guys know, is probably not the greenest of places, and they named Greenland that in order to try to convince more people to come. So it was kind of a marketing strategy. So after the 14 boatloads of people actually made it, those who made it, they settled 2 areas, and they are known as the Eastern and Western settlements. And so this map is not very clear, but you can kind of get the idea. So this is Iceland over here, and he sailed west, and they explored down here on the eastern coast of Greenland and kind of went around the tip, and these are the areas where they made their settlements. And this remaining leg of the trip where it says Leif Erikson is Eric the Red's son, and we're going to talk about him next. So he was alive, Leif Erikson was alive around 970 to 1020 AD. And he actually converted to Christianity, as quite a few of the settlers in Greenland did. Prior to that, he believed in some of the Nordic gods, kind of a pagan type religion. But around 1000 AD, he sailed west from the settlements in Greenland to Helluland, which is the land of flat stones, which is now known as Baffin Island, and Markland, which was called Woodland, which is now known as Labrador. And this was in Canada 500 years before Columbus. So despite the fact that a lot of people are taught in elementary school in various places that Columbus was the first European to get to North America, that is actually not true. They did have a very short-lived Viking settlement in Newfoundland, but it was not very successful due to the harsh weather. There weren't very many resources there for the people to survive on. On his return trip from Canada, he rescued a castaway from Iceland, and therefore afterwards was known as Leif the Lucky. Okay. Other explorers at the time who weren't necessarily going to North and South America, however, were still extremely important. One of them was Marco Polo. He was alive between 1254 and 1324 AD. In 1271, Marco Polo traveled overland from Venice, Italy, to China via the Silk Roads. Now, the Silk Road is not one road that goes from Europe to Asia. It was actually a series of roads that went to various places depending on where you wanted to trade. And so he arrived in China and China was under the rule of Kublai Khan at the time, who's actually a Mongolian. So China wasn't actually being ruled by the Chinese at the time. And he arrived 1275, around there. So you can see there's a 4-year difference between when he left Italy and when he made it to China, and when they think they did. He stayed in China in the area for 17 years, and at times he worked for Kublai Khan as a government agent. And when he came back, he had his wonderful writings and stories that were published. He had all these spices and silks and wonderful things that everybody just absolutely loved in Europe. And when he brought those back, and so he became very famous for his adventures there. So his manuscript of his stories provided new information that really triggered a desire to find a faster route to East Asia, because more people in Europe wanted more of these things that he brought back. Now, Marco Polo, despite the fact that he wrote these manuscripts and over his 17-year adventure, there's some people who doubt some of his stories. The Chinese kept very good records of like their battles and things, and at times Marco Polo claimed that he was in certain areas during certain battles that were going on in China, but there were no records of him in the Chinese records of being there. And some of his facts are a little inaccurate, and there's a few things that he doesn't mention in his manuscripts that we know were happening in China at the time, and if he was actually there, it's very surprising that he wouldn't have mentioned these things. So there's a few controversial things about him. However, most people take what they can at face value, but he was still very influential despite the fact that there are some inaccuracies on there. And so this map down here, even though that is not in English, the dotted line is Marco Polo's journey. So you can see he went over a large area, and on his return trip he came back via sea for most of the way, which was obviously a much faster way to travel. So the longer trip was his trip out to China. Okay, so why